When the Empire learned why Earth keeps its most dangerous soldiers looking like civilians. The Xylar Empire's ships descended upon Viridian outposts with the cold efficiency that had come to define their military doctrine. Their gleaming warships, adorned with the Empire's distinctive red and gold insignia, arranged themselves in perfect formation around the space station, a display of power as much as a tactical positioning. Overlord Kalenver stood on the command deck of his flagship, watching the irregular shape of Viridian grow larger in the view screen. His lips curled into what passed for a smile among the Xylar, a slight upward tilt that never reached his crystalline eyes. Primitive infrastructure, he remarked to his officers. I'm surprised it maintains atmospheric integrity at all. It was designed for commerce, not conquest, Subcommander Lyra replied, her attention fixed on the sensor readouts rather than the visual display. Multiple species cohabit the station, though humans make up approximately 37% of the population. Ver made a dismissive sound deep in his throat. Humans. Soft-bodied, soft-minded creatures. Their militaries are a joke, all flash and obsolete weaponry with none of the discipline that makes true warriors. He straightened his already impeccable uniform. Nevertheless, establish the standard security protocols, disarm the population, implement curfews, and set up checkpoints at all major junctions. Yes, Overlord, Lyra said, her voice neutral but her eyes thoughtful. Should we expect resistance? Var laughed, a sharp barking sound that made junior officers flinch. From humans? They'll surrender before our boots touch their decks. If any foolish enough to consider themselves soldiers are present, they'll be easy to identify and neutralize. Humans have no subtlety. Their warriors wear their status openly. As the Xylar landing craft positioned themselves at Viridian's docking ports, a middle-aged human male named Marcus Thorne watched from the grimy window of his repair shop on Level 4, Sector G. His unremarkable face betrayed no emotion as he observed the military precision of the Xylar deployment. He was of average height, with a slight paunch that spoke of too many hours sitting and too many meals eaten hastily. His brown hair was thinning at the crown, and wire-rimmed glasses sat askew on his nose. Grease stained his workman's jumpsuit, and a tool belt hung low around his waist. Anyone looking at Marcus Thorne would see nothing but an aging maintenance worker, perhaps competent at his job, but otherwise entirely forgettable. No one would see Agent Janus of Earth's Directorate Alpha, one of the most effective deep-cover operatives humanity had ever produced. Janus turned away from the window and returned to the open ventilation panel he'd been working on. His fingers moved with practiced efficiency as he sealed a small device into a recess where it would never be found during routine maintenance. As he worked, he listened to the announcement blaring through the station's comm system. Attention citizens of Viridian Outpost. This facility is now under the protection and jurisdiction of the glorious Xylar Empire. Remain calm and comply with all instructions from Imperial personnel. For your safety, surrender all weapons at designated collection points. A curfew will be in effect from 20 to 6 o'clock station time. All commerce and movement may continue within these restrictions. The Empire brings order and prosperity to all who embrace its rule. Janus smiled faintly as he closed the panel. The Xylar were nothing if not predictable. He'd studied their occupation protocols extensively during his briefing on Earth. The weapon collection points would give him an excellent opportunity to assess their security scanner technology. The curfew would provide darkness to work in, and their arrogance would be their undoing. He gathered his tools and headed toward the marketplace on Level 2. It was time to begin building his network. The first week of occupation proceeded as Janus expected. The Xylar established their command center in the station's administrative section, posting guards at vital junctions and infrastructure. They conducted thorough weapons sweeps and implemented biometric scans for all residents. Overlord Var made daily appearances on the station's broadcast system, his speeches full of benevolent rhetoric masking iron-fisted control. Most of Viridian's residents adapted quickly, keeping their heads down and continuing their business as best they could under the new restrictions. A few troublemakers were swiftly arrested and made examples of, mostly young hotheads who couldn't keep their mouths shut or their fists by their sides. Janus became a fixture in the main marketplace, where he'd set up a small repair stall. He fixed environmental suits, patched coolant systems, and rewired malfunctioning droids. His rates were reasonable, his work competent, and his conversation bland but friendly. People came to him with their broken technology, and while he fixed their problems, he listened. Everyone had complaints about the occupation, and most were happy to share them with a harmless repairman. "They've requisitioned half my warehouse space," grumbled Dorax, a six-limbed Centaurian merchant, as Janus calibrated his atmospheric converter. "Claim they need it for strategic supplies, but I've seen them moving luxury goods in there. They're skimming the best imports for themselves." "Tough break," Janus replied mildly, adjusting a sensor. "Have they at least inventoried what they're taking? For compensation later?" Dorax's laugh was bitter. "They handed me a datapad to thumbprint, but the quantities were all wrong. When I pointed it out, the officer said I could either sign or take a trip to the detention level." Janus nodded sympathetically. "Smart choice to sign. There, that should regulate your air mix properly now." He handed back the converter. "By the way, I heard they're having trouble with the environmental controls in the cargo sectors. Apparently, the old Viridian systems don't interface well with Xylar tech." "No surprise there," Dorax said, paying for the repair. "This station's a patchwork of a dozen different technologies. Only people who really understand it are the maintenance crews who've been here for years. Like me," Janus said with a self-deprecating smile. "Just a shame they don't consult us before trying to override systems they don't understand." As Dorax left, Janus added another note to his mental map of the station. The Xylar were consolidating resources, creating central points of vulnerability. Perfect. That evening, as the curfew fell, Janus slipped into the maintenance tunnels that honeycombed the station structure. Unlike the main corridors, these narrow passages weren't monitored by the Xylar. They were too numerous, too complex, and too seemingly insignificant. But Janus knew better. Control the maintenance system, and you controlled the station's lifeblood: air, water, power, and data. He made his way to junction box 47G, a critical node connecting the cargo level's environmental controls to the central system. There, he installed a small device, one of many he'd smuggled onto the station in pieces, disguised as repair parts. This one would allow him to remotely manipulate the temperature and humidity in specific cargo bays. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger alarms, just enough to spoil sensitive goods over time. As he worked, his earpiece picked up a Xylar security transmission. They were discussing a change in patrol routes. Janus frowned. That wasn't in their standard procedure. Someone was thinking independently. The next morning, as Janus was fixing a food processor for a cantina owner, he spotted Subcommander Lyra moving through the marketplace with a small security detail. Unlike most Xylar officers, who marched through with barely concealed disdain, she was observing carefully, occasionally stopping to question vendors about their operations. When she approached his stall, Janus hunched his shoulders slightly, making himself appear smaller, less significant. "You, human, what services do you provide here?" Her voice was crisp but not hostile. Janus looked up, blinking owlishly behind his glasses. "Me? Oh, I'm just a repair technician, ma'am. I fix things, environmental equipment, food processors, personal tech. Nothing fancy." He gestured to the disassembled processor on his workbench. "Just trying to keep things running smoothly." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly. "How long have you been stationed on Viridian?" "Going on 7 years now," Janus replied, his tone suggesting mild surprise at her interest. "Came out from Earth on a 2-year contract and just never left. Work's steady, and it's peaceful here. Or was anyway." He immediately looked down, as if regretting the implied criticism. Lyra didn't react to the comment. "You must know the station's systems well after so long." Janus shrugged. "Some parts better than others. It's a big place. I mostly handle residential and commercial zones. The deep infrastructure stuff is handled by the chief engineer's team." A calculated misdirection. He knew every inch of Viridian systems. "I see." She glanced at his workbench, noted the organized array of tools. The Empire values skilled technicians. Continue your work. With that, she moved on, but Janice noticed her looking back once, thoughtfully. A potential problem, he decided. Someone who actually paid attention. That night, Janice put the next phase of his plan into motion. He accessed one of his hidden devices and initiated a series of minor system glitches across the station. Inventory management systems began showing discrepancies. Communication channels experienced intermittent static. Environmental controls in the Xylar barracks fluctuated just enough to disturb sleep cycles. None of these issues would be immediately traced to sabotage. They would appear as integration problems between Xylar technology and Viridian's older systems. Exactly what everyone expected during an occupation. But they would slowly degrade efficiency, create frustration, and waste resources as the Xylar struggled to identify and fix each problem. In the command center, Overlord Var's patience was wearing thin by the third day of persistent minor malfunctions. Incompetence, he bellowed, slamming a fist onto the conference table. How difficult can it be to maintain basic systems on this decrepit station? The Xylar technical officer standing before him flinched. We're working at maximum capacity, Overlord. The infrastructure is older than our protocols account for, and the local systems use non-standardized components that... I don't want excuses, or cut them off. I want results. Bring in more personnel, if necessary. Conscript locals with technical knowledge. I will not have our operations compromised by faulty climate controls and inventory errors. From her position at the secondary command console, Lyra spoke up. Overlord, I've been reviewing the pattern of system failures. There's something unusual about their distribution. Var turned his glare toward her. Explain. Lyra called up a station schematic on the main display. The malfunctions appear random at first glance, but when mapped against time and location, they show a distinct pattern. They begin in peripheral systems, then migrate inward toward more critical functions. It's almost as if what, Subcommander? Var's voice was dangerously quiet. As if they were probing for weaknesses, sir. Testing our responses. Var stared at the display, then shook his head dismissively. You see calculated strategy where there is only decay and poor maintenance. This station was failing before we arrived. Our presence has simply accelerated the inevitable breakdown. With respect, Overlord, Lyra persisted. The station functioned adequately for years before our arrival. And these aren't catastrophic failures. They're subtle disruptions that specifically impact our operations while leaving civilian functions mostly intact. Are you suggesting sabotage, Subcommander? By whom? We've confiscated all weapons. Our security scans have detected no organized resistance. The humans here are merchants and technicians, not warriors. Var's tone made it clear what he thought of the possibility. I don't know, Lyra admitted, but I request permission to investigate further. Var waved a hand impatiently. If it will stop these constant interruptions, proceed. But don't neglect your primary duties. And, Subcommander, don't waste my time with speculations until you have concrete evidence. Lyra inclined her head respectfully, but her eyes were troubled as she returned to her console. Meanwhile, Janice was expanding his network. He'd identified key individuals throughout the station, people with access, with grievances, or simply with loose tongues. He never recruited them directly or revealed his true purpose. Instead, he cultivated relationships, offered favors, and occasionally planted suggestions that served his ends. With Zara, the water reclamation technician, he established rapport by helping her bypass the Xylar rationing controls to provide extra water to families with children. With Nevik, the Arcturian communications specialist, he shared technical workaround for the new Xylar censorship algorithms. With Dr. Elaine Forrester, who ran the station's medical facility, he ensured critical medical supplies overlooked in Xylar requisitions found their way to her clinic. None of them knew they were being recruited into a resistance network. They simply saw Marcus as a helpful friend in difficult times, someone who could fix problems, who knew the station's secrets, who always seemed to be around when needed. 3 weeks into the occupation, Janice was ready to escalate. The Xyler had grown accustomed to minor inconveniences. It was time to show them what real disruption looked like. He began with the supply chain. Using access codes gleaned from friendly cargo handlers, he introduced subtle errors into the automated routing systems. Critical military supplies were directed to distant storage bays. Perishable goods were held in customs clearance cycles until they spoiled. Equipment requisitions were duplicated, then canceled, then reinstated at different priorities. The results rippled through the Xyler command structure. Units didn't receive expected replacements. Officers couldn't locate requested materials. Inventory reports showed items simultaneously present and missing. As frustrations mounted, accusations flew between departments. VAR ordered increasing security measures, focusing on the possibility of physical theft rather than system manipulation. Next, Janice targeted communication. He didn't sever it. That would be too obvious. Instead, he introduced latency and unreliability. Messages arrived out of sequence. Orders were delayed just long enough to cause confusion. Automated systems occasionally routed non-critical communiques to the wrong recipients, leading to information leaks and misunderstandings. The Xyler, with their rigid hierarchy and dependence on clear command structures, found this particularly destabilizing. Junior officers, uncertain if delayed orders were still valid, made contradictory decisions. Coordination between security teams broke down. Patrols appeared at the wrong locations or at the wrong times. Throughout it all, Janice maintained his cover as Marcus the repairman. If anything, his business increased as the Xyler occupation forces began experiencing personal equipment failures. He fixed their problems efficiently, charged reasonable rates, and always presented the same harmless facade. But Subcommander Lyra was watching. She'd begun compiling her own database of anomalies, independent of the official reports. She'd established unofficial observation posts at key junctions, staffed by officers she personally trusted. And she'd started mapping the movements of certain Viridian residents who seemed unusually well-informed or unexpectedly resourceful. One name that kept appearing in her analysis was Marcus Thorne. Nothing about him raised immediate alarm. He was exactly where he should be most of the time, doing exactly what one would expect. But Lyra had noticed that systems tended to stabilize in areas shortly after he serviced equipment there. And he seemed to have an unusually diverse client base for a simple repair technician. 6 weeks into the occupation, the situation reached a critical point. A power fluctuation in the Xyler barracks resulted in weapons systems briefly activating, causing minor injuries and significant property damage. An environmental accident in a primary storage facility ruined a month's worth of synthetic protein rations. And most concerning to VAR, a data breach exposed the personal communications of several high-ranking officers, revealing unflattering opinions about the Overlord's leadership. VAR called an emergency meeting of his command staff. His usually immaculate appearance had deteriorated. His uniform showed signs of hasty adjustment, and his crystalline eyes had developed stress fractures around the edges. "This can no longer be attributed to coincidence or incompetence," he announced, his voice tight with controlled fury. "We are under attack. Not from warriors, we would have crushed them immediately, but from some form of covert operation." Lyra stepped forward. "I've been investigating the possibility of coordinated sabotage for some time, Overlord. With your permission, I'd like to present my findings." VAR gestured impatiently for her to proceed. Using the command center's display system, Lyra presented a complex web of incidents, system failures, and anomalous activities. The pattern suggests a sophisticated understanding of our protocols and vulnerabilities. Whoever is responsible has extensive knowledge of both Viridian systems and our own operational methods. "A spy? Impossible," growled the security chief. "Our counterintelligence measures would have detected any transmissions to enemy forces." "Not a spy," Lyra corrected. "An operative. Someone already embedded here before our arrival. Someone with technical expertise, local knowledge, and training in asymmetric warfare." "Human?" VAR asked, his contempt evident despite his growing concern. Almost certainly, Lyra confirmed. The methodology matches known Earth military intelligence tactics, specifically a division known as Directorate Alpha. Var's expression darkened. I've heard whispers of this group. Supposedly elite human operatives who work without uniforms or traditional military structure. Most military analysts consider them a myth, propaganda to disguise human weakness in conventional warfare. The intelligence brief I reviewed suggests otherwise, Lyra said. Directorate Alpha specializes in what humans call gray zone operations, actions below the threshold of open warfare that destabilize enemy forces from within. They're trained to operate independently for years, maintaining deep cover identities while systematically undermining targeted regimes. If such an operative exists on this station, identify and eliminate them immediately, Var ordered. That's the difficulty, Overlord. These agents are specifically trained to appear unremarkable. They create cover identities that withstand scrutiny. They rarely act directly, instead manipulating systems and individuals to create cascading failures that appear accidental. Lyra hesitated before adding, however, I have identified several persons of interest for closer surveillance. Do whatever is necessary, Var said. Increase security protocols, random searches, extended curfews. I want this saboteur found before any more damage is done. As the meeting dispersed, Lyra lingered, studying her data once more. One name continued to draw her attention, Marcus Thorne. Nothing about him stood out, and that itself was beginning to seem suspicious. The increased security measures fell across Viridian like a heavy blanket. Checkpoints multiplied. Citizens were subjected to enhanced scans and questioning. The curfew extended to 16 hours, leaving only a brief window for necessary commerce. Xylar troops conducted random searches of residences and businesses, confiscating anything that could potentially be used for sabotage, which in practice meant almost any tool or technology. For most residents, the Xylar occupation had shifted from an inconvenience to a nightmare. For Janus, it created both challenges and opportunities. The frequent patrols limited his movement through the station, but they also strained the Xylar's already compromised resources. The enhanced security screenings might have detected his more sophisticated equipment, but they also created bottlenecks that disrupted the station's operations further. And the harsh treatment of civilians generated widespread resentment that made people more willing to turn a blind eye to resistance activities. Janus adapted. He began using a more distributed approach, relying on his unwitting network to carry out actions he could no longer perform personally. Zara from Water Reclamation adjusted flow rates to Xylar facilities based on his casual suggestions about conservation measures. Nevican Communications implemented efficiency algorithms that Janus had designed, which subtly degraded Xylar transmissions. Even Dr. Forrester, though she would never knowingly harm anyone, began adjusting environmental parameters in the medical bay based on Janus's recommendations for optimal healing conditions, changes that left Xylar patients feeling subtly disoriented and uncomfortable. None of these individuals realized they were part of a coordinated campaign. Each believed they were making small, justified adjustments to mitigate the occupation's harshness. Only Janus saw the complete picture, how each minor action contributed to the systematic unraveling of Xylar control. But Lyra was watching more closely now. She'd assigned a surveillance team to monitor Marcus Thorne specifically, tracking his movements, his contacts, his repair jobs. She began building a comprehensive profile of the unassuming technician, noting patterns too consistent to be natural, connections too convenient to be coincidental. 2 months into the occupation, the situation was becoming untenable for the Xylar. Supply shortages had reached critical levels. Communication breakdowns had led to conflicting orders and territorial disputes between units. Environmental malfunctions had caused illness and fatigue throughout the ranks, and morale had plummeted as troops found themselves constantly responding to emergencies rather than maintaining orderly control. Overlord Var received a direct communication from Imperial Command. Stabilize Viridian within 30 days or be replaced. The message couldn't have been clearer. Failure would mean not just professional disgrace, but likely execution. Var called Lyra to his private chambers, away from the increasingly factional command staff. "Tell me you've made progress," he said without preamble, his voice ragged with stress. "I believe I have identified our primary saboteur," Lyra replied. "A human technician named Marcus Thorne. His background is suspiciously generic. No family connections, no notable achievements, no significant history before arriving on Viridian. He maintains a small repair business that gives him access to various station systems. And he has established relationships with key personnel throughout the civilian infrastructure. Evidence of actual sabotage." Var demanded. Lyra hesitated. "Nothing direct. He's too careful for that. But the statistical correlation between his movements and subsequent system failures exceeds random probability by orders of magnitude." Var paced the chamber, his uniform's insignia catching the light with each sharp turn. "Statistical correlation is not proof. Imperial Command won't accept probabilistic analysis as justification for my failures." He stopped suddenly. "Bring him in. Use maximum security protocols. I want him interrogated personally." "Yes, Overlord," Lyra said. "When shall I?" "Now," Var snapped. "This very moment. I want answers before the next system fails." Lyra saluted and departed, already communicating orders to her most trusted security team. In his repair shop, Janus was aware something had changed. The Xylar patrol patterns had shifted subtly over the past few days. Certain contacts had stopped communicating, and he'd noticed surveillance devices in locations that suggested a targeted operation rather than general monitoring. He was preparing contingencies when his door slid open and Subcommander Lyra entered, flanked by 4 heavily armed Xylar troopers. "Marcus Thorne," she stated formally, "you are required to accompany us to the command center for questioning regarding security matters." Janus blinked, his expression shifting from surprise to confusion to nervous compliance. Emotional states carefully calculated to appear authentic. "Me? What kind of security matters? I'm just a repair technician," he stammered, wiping his hands on a rag as he stood from his workbench. "That will be determined during questioning," Lyra replied coldly. "Come now, or my soldiers will assist you." Janus raised his hands placatingly. "No need for that. I'm a law-abiding citizen, happy to help the, glorious Xylar Empire however I can." He shuffled forward, projecting an image of harmless compliance. As they escorted him through the corridors, Janus noted every detail: guard positions, surveillance coverage, access points. They were taking him via the most secure route, through areas with maximum Xylar presence. Logical, but predictable. In the command center, Overlord Var waited, his tall form silhouetted against the starfield visible through the viewport. He turned as Janus was brought in, his crystalline eyes scanning the human with evident disdain. "This is your saboteur?" he asked Lyra, voice heavy with skepticism. "This specimen." Janus hunched his shoulders further, enhancing his appearance of intimidation. "Sir, there must be some mistake. I'm just—" "Silence, or cut him off. You will speak when questioned." He turned to Lyra. "Secure him and begin the interrogation." The troopers forced Janus into a chair designed for Xylar physiology, making it even more uncomfortable for his human frame. Restraints clamped around his wrists and ankles. Lyra stepped forward with a handheld scanner. "This will detect falsehoods in your physiological responses," she explained, though Janus already knew the capabilities and limitations of Xylar truth detection technology. "Answer truthfully, and this process will be brief." Janus nodded, his expression a mixture of confusion and fear. Carefully calibrated responses that would register as genuine on the scanner. "State your full name and place of origin," Lyra began. "Marcus Thorne, born in New Chicago, Earth." The scanner showed no deception, because Marcus Thorne was a completely realized identity with authenticated records and a constructed psychological profile. Janus had lived as Marcus for so long that, on a certain level, He believed in the identity himself. "How long have you been on Viridian Outpost?" 7 years, for months, and Janus paused as if calculating. "About 16 days station time." Again, the scanner registered truth. Janus had indeed been on Viridian precisely that long. His cover had been established well in advance for this exact scenario. The questioning continued, covering his background, his technical knowledge, his movements during specific incidents. For each question, Janus provided answers that were technically true while revealing nothing of significance. He admitted to being in certain locations where sabotage had occurred, but explained his presence with legitimate repair work. He acknowledged knowing individuals who had been involved in system failures, but described purely professional relationships. Throughout the interrogation, Ver grew increasingly agitated while Lyra became more thoughtful, watching Janus with narrowed eyes. "This is pointless," Ver finally snapped. "He registers as truthful on all responses, yet the pattern of evidence is clear. Either our detection technology is flawed, or—" He trailed off, then stepped closer to Janus, looming over him. "What do you know about Directorate Alpha?" Janus allowed a flicker of genuine surprise to show. He hadn't expected them to have that information. "Directorate what? Is that some kind of Earth government agency?" The scanner wavered slightly, a partial truth. Janus did indeed know what Directorate Alpha was, but his surprise at hearing Var mention it was genuine. Lyra caught the fluctuation. "The scanner detected ambiguity in your response." "Explain." Janus frowned, appearing confused and worried. "I don't know what you mean. I've never heard of any Directorate Alpha. I'm a repair technician, not a government agent. Maybe the scanner's picking up my anxiety? I mean, I'm strapped to a chair being interrogated by the most powerful military force in the galaxy." Var sneered. "Your primitive psychological manipulation is transparent. You are trained to defeat basic truth detection. Lyra, prepare for enhanced interrogation." As Lyra moved toward a control panel, Janus made his decision. The situation had escalated beyond what could be managed through continued deception. It was time for the contingency plan, a final coordinated system failure that would throw the entire station into carefully managed chaos. Using a neural implant disguised as a dental filling, Janus transmitted a specific frequency pattern, a prearranged signal that activated devices he had planted throughout Viridian's infrastructure. Within seconds, alarms began blaring across the command center. "Overlord," a communications officer called out. Multiple critical failures reported throughout the station. Life support fluctuating in sectors 3 through 7. Gravity systems destabilizing in the docking bay. Security doors cycling randomly in all sectors. Var whirled away from Janus. "What? How?" "Stabilize immediately." As the command center erupted into frantic activity, Janus made his next move. The restraints securing him, standard Xyler design, had a hydraulic weakness he had identified months ago. With precise application of pressure and a dislocated thumb, painful but manageable, he could slip his right hand free. Lyra, unlike the others, hadn't rushed to a control station. She was watching Janus, her expression calculating. "He timed this," she said, just loud enough for Var to hear. "He's causing this somehow." Before Var could respond, the lights flickered and emergency power engaged, exactly as Janus had planned. In the momentary darkness, he freed his hand, released his other restraints, and moved with swift precision. By the time full lighting returned seconds later, Janus had incapacitated the nearest guard and acquired a sidearm. He wasn't aiming it at anyone. That would provoke immediate response, but instead at a specific panel on the wall, one that controlled atmospheric containment for the command center. "Nobody move," he said, his voice completely transformed. Gone was the nervous technician. This voice was calm, authoritative, and absolutely confident. That includes reaching for weapons or alarm controls. Var stared in shocked disbelief. "What is this?" "This," Janus said, "is what happens when you evaluate threats based on appearances rather than capabilities. A lesson the Xyler Empire apparently needs to learn." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Directorate Alpha." Janus inclined his head slightly. "As you suspected, Subcommander. You're more perceptive than your superiors give you credit for." You can't possibly escape, Var said, regaining his composure. This station is under complete Xylar control. Is it? Janice asked mildly. Check your systems. Right now, life support is failing in your barracks area. Weapons lockers are locked down. Communication with your ships has been severed. And civilian resistance, which I've been carefully cultivating for months, is mobilizing throughout the station. As if to confirm his words, more alarms sounded, and the tactical display showed spreading chaos throughout Viridian. This is impossible, Var whispered. One man couldn't. One properly trained operative can destabilize an entire occupation force if they're arrogant enough, Janice corrected him. You've been losing this battle since before you arrived, Overlord. Your defeat was built into Viridian's systems months ago, disguised as routine maintenance and upgrades. Lyra stepped forward, ignoring the weapon pointed her way. What do you want? The immediate withdrawal of all Xylar forces from Viridian Outpost, Janice stated. Complete and unconditional. Var laughed harshly. The Empire doesn't surrender to terrorists. This isn't terrorism, Janice replied. It's strategic leverage. And you misunderstand your situation, Overlord. I'm not asking you to surrender. I'm offering you the only path to survival. He gestured toward the tactical display, where system failures were cascading across the station. In approximately 17 minutes, life support will fail completely in all areas occupied by Xylar forces. Docking clamps will release on your vessels, sending them adrift. And evidence of your various violations of interstellar law, including the appropriation of civilian resources and mistreatment of non-combatants, will be transmitted to every major power in this sector. Var's face contorted with rage. You're bluffing. Check your secure communications, Janice suggested. See if Imperial Command has received an interesting data package within the last few minutes. Lyra moved to a console, worked the controls, and paled visibly. Overlord, he's not bluffing. Command has received detailed records of our operations here. They're demanding explanations. Var's confidence finally cracked. This is impossible. You're just a human. A technician. No, Janice corrected him. I'm what happens when Earth decides a situation warrants sending someone like me. We don't announce ourselves with uniforms and parades. We don't posture and threaten. We simply ensure that those who threaten our interests fail, usually without ever understanding why. The command center fell silent except for the continuing alarms. Var's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly, the gesture of a warrior recognizing defeat. What assurance do we have that your sabotage won't destroy the station if we withdraw? Lyra asked pragmatically. None except my word, Janice replied. But consider, if I wanted to destroy Viridian, I could have done so at any point in the past 2 months. My objective has always been to remove your forces while preserving the station and its civilian population. Lyra turned to Var. Overlord, I recommend immediate withdrawal. Our position is untenable. Var stared at Janice with naked hatred. This humiliation will not stand. The Empire will return in force. Perhaps, Janice acknowledged. But not today. And when they do, they'll find more like me waiting. That's the message I want you to take back to your superiors. Earth doesn't need flashy uniforms or imposing warships to defend its interests. We have people who can break your most secure systems from the inside while looking like harmless civilians. 3 hours later, Janice stood in the main observation lounge, watching as the Xylar fleet broke formation and began moving away from Viridian. The evacuation had been swift and grudging, with Xylar troops glaring hatefully at the civilians they passed on their way to the shuttles. Overlord Var had departed last, his crystalline eyes fixed on Janice with a promise of retribution that required no words. As the last ship disappeared into hyperspace, a relieved murmur spread through the gathered crowd. People began hugging each other, some crying, others laughing with the sudden release of tension. Several approached Janice to thank him, having witnessed his confrontation with the Xylar leadership via the station's broadcast system, another of his calculated moves. I don't understand, said Zara, the water reclamation technician. You were just Marcus the repairman. How did you? Janice smiled, still wearing the face and manner of Marcus Thorne. Sometimes the most effective resistance isn't about fighting. It's about understanding systems, mechanical and human, and applying the right pressure at the right points. Dr. Forrester approached, her medical scanner humming as she waved it over him. "You have 3 cracked ribs and a dislocated thumb that needs proper treatment," she said firmly. "And I suspect quite a bit more you're not showing." "I'll be fine, doctor," Janice assured her. "There are others who need your attention more urgently." "You're not wriggling out of medical care," she insisted. "My clinic 1 hour, and that's an order." Janice nodded, recognizing the same steel in her voice that had kept her medical facility running despite Xyler interference. As the crowd dispersed to begin repairing and reclaiming their home, Nevik, the communications specialist, lingered. "You used us," the Arcturian said quietly. "All those suggestions, those helpful tips, they were part of your plan." "Yes," Janice admitted, "but only because I knew you all cared about this station and its people. I just aligned our interests." Nevik considered this, his facial tentacles rippling thoughtfully. "Will you stay? Help us rebuild." Janice looked out at the stars, his expression unreadable. Marcus Thorne might, for a while, but both knew it was unlikely. People were already looking at him differently, with awe, with questions, with suspicion. His cover was irrevocably compromised, and somewhere out there, the Xyler Empire was reassessing its understanding of humanity as a threat. 2 days later, a nondescript transport vessel requested departure clearance from Viridian. Its registered owner, Marcus Thorne, had sold his repair business to an apprentice and decided to seek opportunities elsewhere following the Xyler withdrawal. Few questioned his decision. Many residents were relocating after the occupation. As the transport pulled away, Janice sat in the pilot's seat, already mentally shedding the identity he'd worn for over 7 years. In his secure compartment was a data crystal containing his full report for Directorate Alpha, along with recommendations for Viridian's future security. His next assignment would likely involve a completely different identity, a different skill set, a different mission. Such was the nature of his service. Back on Viridian, Subcommander Lyra, who had requested political asylum rather than return to face certain execution for the Xyler failure, stood in what had been Marcus Thorne's repair shop. She ran her fingers over the workbench, examining the tools left behind, searching for some insight into the man who had single-handedly defeated an Imperial occupation force. "Looking for answers?" Dr. Forrester asked from the doorway. Lyra turned, her expression troubled. "Try to understand. One human shouldn't have been able to accomplish what he did. Perhaps that's the lesson," Forrester suggested. "You Xyler evaluate strength by its visible manifestations. Weaponry, physical prowess, uniform discipline. Humans learned long ago that true power often lies in what you don't see coming." "A dangerous philosophy," Lyra murmured. "For those who make themselves our enemies." "Yes," Forrester agreed. "Something your empire might want to consider going forward." Far away, in a heavily secured briefing room on Earth, high-ranking officials of Directorate Alpha reviewed Janice's report on Operation Viridian. The operation had been a calculated risk, allowing the Xyler to establish an occupation specifically to demonstrate the effectiveness of asymmetric warfare against their rigid military doctrine. It had succeeded beyond expectations. The psychological impact on Xyler military thinking will be significant, noted the Strategic Operations Director. Their entire approach is based on visible power projection and conventional force superiority. The idea that a single operative could dismantle an occupation force without firing a shot challenges their fundamental military philosophy. "What about Janice?" asked another official. "Standard decompression and reassignment." The director nodded. "After 7 years deep cover, he'll need at least 6 months integration before his next assignment. But he's already requested an accelerated timeline. Apparently, he has some thoughts about the Orion situation." "Typical," someone muttered with grudging admiration. "These field operatives never really rest." The briefing continued, analyzing the wider implications of the Viridian operation. None of them spoke the deeper truth they all understood, that Earth's greatest defense had never been its fleets or its armies, But individuals like Janice, ordinary in appearance, exceptional in capability, invisible until it was too late. 6 months later, a comprehensive report circulated among the highest levels of the Xylar Imperial Command, titled The Viridian Incident, Strategic Assessment and Doctrine Implications. It contained a detailed analysis of the occupation's failure and recommendations for countering similar threats in the future. The report's most quoted section came near its conclusion. The human threat must be fundamentally re-evaluated. Previous assessments, based on conventional military metrics, have catastrophically underestimated their strategic capabilities. Unlike other species who display their military prowess openly, humans conceal their most dangerous operatives within seemingly harmless civilian populations. They wage war not through direct confrontation, but through systematic manipulation of vulnerabilities, using their targets' own systems and prejudices against them. Most concerning is their ability to operate independently for extended periods without detection. A single human operative, properly trained and positioned, can achieve effects comparable to a conventional military unit, but without the logistical footprint or visible signatures that our security protocols are designed to detect. In future operations involving human populations, all personnel must be considered potential threats regardless of appearance or apparent function. The Empire's greatest vulnerability lies not in facing human warships or armies, but in dismissing the danger posed by the unassuming maintenance worker, the helpful administrator, or the friendly merchant. This is why Earth keeps its most dangerous soldiers looking like civilians. And it is a lesson the Empire has now learned at significant cost. In response, the Xylar Empire established a specialized counterintelligence division focused specifically on identifying and neutralizing human covert operatives. Training programs were revised to emphasize the dangers of appearance-based threat assessment, and a new classification was added to the Imperial Threat Registry. Human Operative, Directorate Alpha Class. Threat Level, Omega. Approach with extreme caution. If suspected, do not engage. Report immediately to Imperial Command. Meanwhile, on a distant mining colony near the Galactic Rim, a middle-aged human woman named Sarah Chun started her first day as an environmental systems consultant. She was unremarkable in every way. Competent, but not exceptional, friendly, but not particularly memorable. She kept to herself, did her job well, and never drew attention. None of the colony's residents, human or alien, suspected that beneath her ordinary exterior lay one of Earth's most effective weapons. And by the time they realized the truth, if they ever did, it would already be too late. Agent Janice had a new mission, and the cycle began again.